Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Martin Center online event, Crimea in the Spotlight, The Road to the Occupation. I am Anna Nalivaiko, Project Officer at the Wilfred Martin Center for European Studies, and it is my great pleasure to be moderating today's discussion. We apologize for the small delay, but we'll be sure to recuperate the time at the end of the event. A warm welcome to our online audience, and a thank you also to the mission of Ukraine to the EU for their support in the organization of this event. Before introducing our distinguished panel, a few housekeeping rules. The event will last 1 hour, and after initial questions from my side, we will dedicate some time to questions from the audience. So I do encourage our online viewers to leave their questions and comments in the comment section below the live stream or on the Martin Center social media. But now let me introduce our distinguished guests. We are extremely honored to have with us Emina Japarova, the first Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. Welcome. Mikhail Zibert, Managing Director for Eastern Europe and Central Asia at the European External Action Service. Welcome. And Roland Freundestein, Policy Director of the Martin Center. Welcome, Roland. So, dear panelists, a warm welcome again, and thank you for taking the time to be here with us and to discuss the important topic. So we are here today to discuss the outcomes of the Crimea Platform Summit that took place on the 23rd August in Kyiv and gathered more than 40 international delegations to pave the road to the deoccupation of Crimea. In less than, as we all know, in February 2014, the Russian army in unmarked uniforms began the occupation of the peninsula. In less than a month, on the 18th March, an illegal referendum that allegedly showed that the population favored a reunification with Russia, the Kremlin formally proclaimed the annexation of Crimea. It has been condemned by the international community, which declared the referendum illegal. Since then, however, Crimea has undergone a process of Russification and militarization, becoming a security hazard for Ukraine and the whole region. Immediately afterwards, a conflict in eastern Ukraine erupted, and the focus of the international community shifted to the invasion of Donbass and the Minsk process. But the annexation of Crimea is and will remain one of the main issues on Ukraine's foreign policy agenda. The topic is still very tense and sensitive, and just a few months ago, during the European Championship, the national football team of Ukraine was forced to change their jerseys because of it showed Ukrainian map with Crimea on it and the motto, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. So the issue remains extremely delicate. But Deputy Minister, without further delay, let me turn to you. The Crimea Platform has been created with the purpose of keeping the topic on the table and building the international support and commitment to Ukraine on this issue. So can you tell us a bit more about the format of the platform and its purposes? Thank you.
Thank you, dear Anna, for being so kind to moderate our discussion. And let me thank my dear colleagues and panelists who also joined the discussion, which is really, I believe, the only way to deliver those messages that the audience sometimes cannot hear because the territory, Crimea, is occupied. And we have to understand that huge and unprecedented level of propaganda is there in order to shape false realities. So I think that it's really important thing that we do in trying to deliver the truth. And I think that the best counter propaganda is truth. And I also very grateful to our team, very dedicated team in the Ukrainian mission to EU, and of course to Martin Center for hosting this event and for letting us and giving the floor to discuss some of the issues that are not evident, that are not classic, that need creative attitude, that need reconsideration. And let me start saying that we all have to understand, besides of what Anna has already mentioned by briefing us about the chronicles of the events in 2014, that the Russian aggression really indeed started with the occupation of the Crimean Peninsula. And today it's very cynical, of course, to hear Russian officials saying that this was a so-called referendum that took place that actually brought the will of those Krimchani, how they named the Crimeans, how they named the as if it was a separate identity. But of course, we have to understand that it was a military invasion. There was a Russian army, and I saw it by my own eyes as far as I was a journalist there in 2014. And I traveled Crimea, every corner of Crimea. I attended number of military bases, and I saw Russian army military vehicles, even though they were with unidentified marks. But we, of course, the local population knew that it was a Russian army, and of course, journalists were very much aware of who this army was. So of course we should not speak about the free will of people. It was a military aggression, and the main thing that we also have to understand that it's an ongoing occupation. It did not stop in 2014. So every day the consequences of the occupation have been performed by the occupation authorities. And probably I will also allow myself to brief the audience of what Crimea is today. I don't have any illusion that it's a military base with 2.5 Ukrainian citizens as hostages. Militarization, very bad and very drastic militarization is taking place. All of the components of the military presence of Russia have been modernized. The Black Sea is actually controlled by the Russian submarines, and according to the information that we have, 6 or 7 submarines of the Russian submarines are in the Black Sea. The Sea of Azov has already turned into the inner lake. The staff, the military staff, have been tripled in recent years. And of course, Russia has been putting a lot of money into modernizing the military presence. The other very disturbing factor, and I really want to give the sense of what is going on with the repressive reality, when everyone who dares to publicly say that Crimea is Ukraine, and the whole international community, I believe, is consolidated over the status of Crimea, that it is Ukraine. So if you dare to speak about this loudly, openly, or post a Facebook material about Ukrainian Crimea, you can be imprisoned for 5 years minimum. And this repressive reality, the changes to the criminal code of the Russian Federation, the foreign agents, the saboteurs, the extremists and terrorists whom the Russian FSB finds almost on everyday basis in Crimea, is this reality that is about fear. And what I have mentioned is that friends of mine or relatives of mine who travel and visit me in Kiev, when we start speaking about Crimea, they immediately whisper. They don't even speak up loudly. So of course, my conclusion is that the level of the censorship of average people is super high because fear is there. And of course, the idea behind is to squeeze out those loyal populations. So Ukrainian citizens, they tend to leave the occupied peninsula, and Russia is motivating Russian citizens to resettle to Crimea. And at least 500,000 of newcomers is already on the peninsula. And this is a very traditional policy, starting from the Russian Empire times. And let me also give you a little bit of historical context, which is crucial here in order to understand the current situation. In 1783, when Catherine II annexed Crimea for the first time, the first step she did, she started oppress the local population, indigenous Crimean Tatars. Within 100 years after the Catherine II annexed Crimea, 1/3 of Crimean Tatar population left the peninsula to Ottoman Empire those days. Then in 1944, when the deportation of Crimean Tatars took place under the pretext of collaboration with Nazi Germany, when all of the Crimean Tatars, without any exceptions, seniors, women, children, were put in the cattle shed wagons and taken into Uzbekistan and Central Asian countries, the others, I mean, people from Russian mainland inhabited Crimea in a decade after the deportation. And still the same policy is being conducted in Crimea. And the idea is actually to change and to reshape the demographic landscape of Crimea, to bring loyal population, and of course to commit and conduct further crimes, because unfortunately we see it on every dimension, starting from the international law and those agreements, bilateral and multilateral, that had been violated by Russia by the fact of the Crimean occupation. So in order, and then the third thing that I want to, and probably the final thing that I want to raise, saying what Crimea is today, is that Russia is not only a silent witness, is not only the occupying power in state, but it's also a country that is trying to convince the whole world that the situation in Crimea is perfect, that they take care about people, they put a lot of money into infrastructure projects. They really do. They really do build up roads. There is a Kerch Bridge, there is an international airport. You can even see the kindergartens and schools newly built up. But the thing is that it has the military aim and the military course, and even the kindergartens and the schools that they construct in Crimea. This is for those servants of Russian army whom they bring by tens of thousands into Crimea. So not only silent witness, I mean that they do try to legitimize the status quo. They use the hybrid warfare means in order to shape their reality, where Crimea is a perfect place and a paradise of Russian glory. And of course, when we started to reconsider our politics, what Ukraine should initiate and what more could be done in order to at least get the issue back on the agenda, because unfortunately within almost 8 years after occupation, the issue objectively and not objectively is been silencing up. And of course, because first Russia is dreaming to silence up the issue, because every criminal does not want to open up the crime or the crime to be revealed. And second, because of course the international conjuncture is turbulent. We have Afghanistan, we have Belarus, we have other international and regional issues that pop out from time to time. And of course, there is really there was a need for Ukrainian diplomacy, for my president, for Minister Kuleba, for our team to come up with an initiative that has a tactical aim. And Crimea Platform is of a tactical instrument that has two interfaces, actually: the domestic one, which is about strengthening Ukrainian domestic response, and the international. So concluding my words, the architecture of the Crimea Platform is actually um, the architecture is very inclusive, and as far as I managed to learn, and while designing the architecture, it doesn't have any other example in the world. So the idea is to cover different dimensions and to come up with an umbrella and a tactical instrument on the level of parliament, experts, governments, so that every stakeholder could find its way how to raise the Crimean issue and how to raise the awareness about the Crimean situation. And the Crimea summit that took place 23rd of August in Kiev, and I'm very much thankful to all of those distinguished partners and countries who participated at the summit. And it was a very successful one, by the way, with 46 delegations, with 13 presidents, with 14 ministers, and two heads of parliaments and several heads of the international organizations. It really demonstrated that there is consolidation and there is a solid position of non-recognition policy. And the outcome of the summit is the adoption of the final declaration that stressed once again that Crimea is Ukraine, that the aggression and the occupation will never be recognized, and that the countries commit themselves to be consolidated towards the final goal of us, not only Ukraine, which is the occupation, which is back to the international order and law. And today we started shaping the other tactical steps in order to, let's say, fill in this frame architecture with concrete results. And of course, I will be happy to answer the questions if they arise about what these steps are exactly about.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. I have a very quick follow-up question for you with regards to violation of human rights. This is also one of the purpose of the Crimea Platform, to bring to light the violation of human rights of pro-Ukrainian activists, but also the gross violation of the rights of Crimean Tatars. So You already told us that what Russia is doing to Russify the peninsula, such as resettling of Russian citizens and trying to really squeeze out every pro-Ukrainian citizens out of Crimea to change the demographics of the peninsula. But I believe that nowadays there are more than 100 political prisoners in Crimea, and most of those are Crimean Tatars. Can you tell us a bit more how the situation is there for them? And do you feel like this topic has enough resonance in international community, or would you like it to be more visible? And what steps the international community and the EU can take in order to tackle this issue of violation of human rights?
Thank you, Anna, for raising this important issue. Indeed, violation of human rights, international humanitarian law is one of the priorities that we defined in terms of the frame of the Crimea Platform, including the other four, which is sanction and defense and security, ecology, economy, and militarization, of course, which is a part of this total defense attitude of the Crimea Platform priority. So the violation of human rights is something that started immediately after the occupation. Since the first days when we saw the Russian army there, we had many victims, and the first one was Rishat Ametov, who was a one-man picketer, Crimean Tatar, who was tortured and killed. And there was a video when he was after the picket, he was put in the car and taken into an unknown direction. In 2 weeks, his body was found tortured, and he was the first victim of the occupation authorities. And unfortunately, Crimean Tatars have become the main target of this repressive instrument and machine, because they were publicly boycotting the so-called referendum. They were arranging and organizing the marches and protest rallies against the Russian reality. And as an act of revenge, in 2016, the Supreme Court of Russian Federation prohibited and declared the measures of Crimean Tatar people, which is a self-governing body of the Crimean Tatar people and the voice, the political voice of the people. They declared the Majlis as the extremist organization, prohibited it, and thus many thousands of Crimean Tatars potentially are under the risk of being detained. And this, you've mentioned 120 political prisoners. It is true, but it is not about the numbers. I have to really give you the sense that all of the Ukrainian citizens are potentially the hostages. If you have a Ukrainian passport, if you cross the so-called administrative line, you can be potentially detained, called a Ukrainian spy. And this is something that we see just today, which is let me probably speak about this openly, that we had one of the participants of the Crimea Platform Summit, Nariman Zhilalov, who is the first deputy chairman of the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people. He came to Kiev 23rd of August. He spoke at the opening of the front office of the Crimea Platform together with the Ukrainian president. He is actually the one who remained living in Crimea and kind of saying that he wants to be by his people, and he is one of the leaders of the Crimean Tatar people. So now he is under detention, and it's very cynical how they did it. The Russian FSB came up with the press release saying that 23rd of August, there was a mechanical crack of the gas pipeline at Perivalne, which is the Simferopol region, at the military base where Nariman Zhilalov was the one who arranged this kind of attacks to crack this pipeline. And then 5 Crimean Tatars were detained. 2 of them, 2 brothers, 2 cousins, together with Nariman, they allegedly call the saboteurs, as if they were collaborating with the Ukrainian intelligence service by doing these acts. And they are under the risk of being imprisoned at least for 10-15 years. And we believe this is a direct act of revenge for the Crimea Platform. And then number of Crimean Tatars, they were detained and kept in the isolation for many hours, like for a day, almost for a night and a day. And by the way, one of those detainees, Asan Akhtemov, is a relative of mine. He is a husband of my cousin. He was tortured in order to kind of so the FSB tortured him to get his revelation as if he took the orders from Nariman Zhilalov to commit these attacks against the pipeline. But this is a very classic thing that FSB conducts against people. And of course, what we do is try to address with this issue as many partners as possible, including the countries of the Crimea Platform, because I think that the only way to safeguard people is the publicity. So as soon as we speak about these cases, as soon as we do not allow to silence it up, there is at least minimum chances that they will not be killed in the prison, or that the number of political prisoners will be less. So I think that this is something that we deliver as a priority, to make the cases of human rights violation as much public as possible.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. And indeed, it's a very important topic. I mean, we see violation of human rights also in Belarus, which has been, very visible. But I think that what you said, public acknowledgement and publicity of these violations in Crimea are very important in order for the international community to understand what's going on, and to keep this topic relevant and address it. So, Mr. Zieber, I'd like to turn to you now. I think we can safely say that the EU has firmly stood with Ukraine since the Maidan revolution, and continuously condemned the violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity. So, what is your point of view on the established format of Crimea Platform, and maybe what concrete steps can the EU take to support Ukraine in the purposes of the platform? And do you see the platform having bigger chances of success, if that's the correct word that we could use, than the Minsk agreements, not ending up in deadlock but moving forward? Thank you.
Yeah, Anna, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here in this debate. It's a pleasure to see the Vice Minister Emine Japarova again. We have discussed these issues a couple of months ago in Kiev, and very happy to talk about it again after this successful summit. Let me start by saying that I would like to congratulate Ukraine on this very important event. That who could say it better than Emine Japarova? Very elaborately already discussed how this summit was has been a major event in bringing back the topic of Crimea to the international discussions. As she rightly said, the problem in such a situation is that international media and international politics tend to hop from one conflict and hotspot to the next, and it is very difficult to uphold necessary international attention to a conflict that is seemingly quiet, and is of course we hear from time to time about terrible human rights violations, as Japarova just said. Um, but when you think of events like the retreat of Western troops from Afghanistan, when you see other Russian policies impacting on countries like Belarus, it is very difficult to keep this necessary attention. And in that way, the summit was a real success, and it was a diplomatic success for Ukraine, and it was an event that will really very much help, I hope, and I'm convinced, the people suffering from human rights violations on the peninsula. The EU has been there at very high level with President Michel and Executive Vice President of the Commission, Dombrovskis, and for a good reason. Because this conflict, which is less in the media also than the Donbas conflict, also inflicted by Russia upon Ukraine, as there is no international mechanism really dealing with it. It has become a fait accompli, and Ukraine and the world at the moment have to live with this situation. So the EU thinks it's very important to control the narratives about the situation. As the Vice Minister has said, the truth is the best way to react to propaganda, and the summit was very instrumental to that. I'll just briefly repeat more or less what has been already said, but from an EU point of view, of course, this is not a Ukrainian problem. It is not a problem only for the security of Ukraine and of the area, of the Black Sea area, because of the militarization of Crimea. It is all of that, but on top of it, it is an international problem, because it is a blatant violation of international law to occupy a foreign land, and that is why it was so important to have this Crimea Platform summit with so many countries at high level having been there, making very clear to the international audiences that this is a problem of violation of the international legal order. And it concerns all of us, whether we are close to Ukraine geographically or not. My next point is, what can we do? That was what was your question in the aftermath of this conference. We have to continue to help the populations that are affected, especially the IDPs coming from Crimea. That is what the EU has done for a long time already, and we have had, and we still have, many programs, including new ones like EU for Resilient Regions, for instance, to help those people affected by the conflict. That is one thing. The next one is the situation of human rights that Emine described very vocally. We have to keep our eye and on the situation, and we have to speak about it time and again, and keep these violations of human rights in the attention of international community. The concrete follow-up is still being discussed among the participants of the summit. It's just a few weeks ago that it took place. All the institutions and countries signing the declaration will now nominate focal points, because we believe the platform is very much should very much be used for coordination, for cooperation, for exchange of views, of information, and the focal points will play a very important role in that. We have to be aware. I think this needs to be said. Unfortunately, that this will probably be a long-term endeavor, and it's a marathon and not a sprint, unfortunately. So it is good to have a structure, to have networks, to have enough energy and means to keep working on this conflict. And the platform, I hope, will be very instrumental to that. The EU is prepared to use it and to play its role in exchanging information and coordinating actions. I would also like to say that in the broader context, and as we know, Russia is the party that has annexed illegally the Crimean Peninsula. This is also very much linked to our policy towards Russia, European Union's policy towards Russia. And here I think in our joint communication prepared for last June's European Council, we have very clearly stated that Russia remains a strategic challenge for the EU, and Crimea, the occupation of Crimea, plays a big role in that. We remain very much engaged along the 5 principles, as they are called, of our Russia policy. And I just wanted to remind that the full implementation of the Minsk agreements is a key element for any change in EU-Russia relations. So here it is not a direct link to Crimea, but a direct link to the Russian interference in Ukraine. And the fact that the EU has remained united in this policy over the last 7 years and will remain united on this point, that is very visible, is very important also for the question of how we can reverse the occupation of Crimea. So let me conclude by saying that Ukraine can count very clearly in the future on the EU support, not only in practical terms, in many ways to cooperate, also with respect to the population concerned on Crimea and from Crimea, but also as a partner to the platform and across international fora like the UN and others, where we also have to uphold the topic of the occupation of Crimea, and of course in tirelessly reaffirming that Crimea is Ukraine, and we stand by the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine in its internationally accepted borders. And of course, I'm open to questions, to a debate very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Siebert. I think you gave a really clear message of commitment and support indeed to Ukraine and its territorial integrity. And later on, I will also ask the speakers a question about security, which I would be very interested in hearing your answers. But I just like to turn to Roland first and speak a bit about the elephant in the room. Which is of course Russia. So I think it's safe to say when Crimea was annexed, the support for the annexation of Crimea in Russia was quite high, and we have seen vicious propaganda campaigns against Ukraine, against Ukrainians, against the people who participated in Maidan revolution. But then I think that there were internal problems in Russia that people became aware of, and now the post-Crimea enthusiasm is gone. So do you see the dialogue then with President Putin as necessary to the cause of the Crimea Platform, or is it rather an obstacle? And in your point of view, some people might say that Crimea will never return to Ukraine, that Russia will never seize it. So is a change of government maybe the answer? The change of government in Russia, the only possibility of returning Crimea, or not even that? What is your opinion on that, Roland? Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. And let me just say that it's a great honor and pleasure to be here with Emine Japarova and Michael Siebert in this event hosted by the Martin Center and the Ukrainian Mission. To answer your question, look, talking is always good, right? The question is, what do you talk about? And with what purpose do you talk and communicate? And I think if the purpose of the EU's communication with Russia over Crimea, over Eastern Ukraine and other topics, if the purpose is to get a fundamental change of Russia's behavior, I think we're deluding ourselves. And that answers also your question about can Crimea be deoccupied while Putin is still in the Kremlin? I think the answer is no. And we have to see this reality. So the purpose of communicating with Vladimir Putin can only be to communicate our resolve, to draw red lines, and actually, to put it into a security political language, to reinforce deterrence for future actions of the Kremlin. Because the sanctions certainly have had, I think the most important effect of the sanctions was not to turn around Russia's behavior. This hasn't happened, but it has prevented worse from happening. I mean, the fact that Mariupol is still a free city is an effect of the EU sanctions of 2014, the summer of 2014. Because they were the clearest possible signal to Putin that worse is still to come if he makes any step towards creating this Novorossiya thing, like basically taking the whole of eastern Ukraine, the eastern half of Ukraine, which was on the cards at the time, politically and even militarily, if Russia had put its weight behind it. So the fact that this didn't happen is a result of deterrence by action and by talking, of course. And that must be the purpose of our communication with the Kremlin. Now, let me just go a little bit into the future. I said that as long as Putin is in power, we will not see fundamental changes in Crimea or anywhere else. That does, of course, not mean that anything coming after Putin will be 180 degrees different from what we are seeing in Russia right now. I mean, that's absolutely clear. But the possibility of an improvement of more cooperative Russian behavior and eventually a deoccupation of Crimea will only exist after Putin leaves the Kremlin, in whatever physical shape, if you know what I mean. Now, this is something for the Russian nation to take care of. This is nothing we can, Anna, you said if we could change the Russian government. No, of course we can't, and of course I'm not talking about regime change here, which happens at the pushing of a button or something. I think the West has quite a bunch of experience now with that type of thinking, and it doesn't work. But, and I want to conclude with this note on EU policy towards Russia, EU strategy towards Russia. We do need a more solid, a more robust, and a more democracy-oriented approach to our relations with Russia. This starts with defending our democracy at home against Russian interference and against Russian aggression in our countries themselves. It continues with supporting democrats, democratic governments, and democratic movements in the neighborhood, in the countries between the European Union and Russia, such as Ukraine, such as Belarus. And it continues with whatever support we can still give to democrats in Russia. And I know there's, for example, returning to the Crimean issue, there has been a great debate on to what extent Alexei Navalny would do anything different on the occupation of Crimea, because he made ambiguous statements years ago, by the way. Well, I've been in several debates with people from the Navalny movement who have assured me that that of course the deoccupation of Crimea would be on the cards if Russian Democrats ever came to power. And the last point is precisely, I think we should mentally prepare, however far this is away in time, but mentally prepare for a democratic Russia. There is no God-given reason why Russians cannot build a democracy. Russia is not Afghanistan, by the way. And therefore, we should formulate criteria on how we would respond to a possible post-Putin Russian democracy. And I say possible, not automatic. But maybe one last remark to conclude about talking and dialogue. You know, there is a tendency in some of the European Union's member states, not least the country that Michael and I belong to define the differences between the West and the Kremlin as misunderstandings, and to think that if you only talk long enough and smart enough, and maybe with a little bit of economic incentives to Vladimir Putin, these conflicts will evaporate. They won't. You know, these are existential conflicts. There is another notion that Putin's aggression, any aggression by Putin, should first of all be answered with an offer for dialogue in the name of de-escalation. Well, I talked about deterrence before, and if you're serious about deterrence, you must be aware that deterrence means the ability and the communicated willingness to escalate in a targeted manner in certain situations. So, you know, to constantly make a fetish of de-escalation and emphasize dialogue after Russian aggression, I'm afraid, is not getting us any further, is bringing us actually in quite a dangerous situation, because it incentivizes, in Putin's eyes, it incentivizes Russian aggression. And finally, and this is something, this is always a problem for all democracies, our short-termism, if you want. I mean, we always look at the next election, we want to have some tangible results, some deliverable, some improvement of our relations with other countries to show for the next democratic contest in our countries. It's classical. Well, we have to develop more stamina and more strategic patience, because you know, changes in our relations with Russia, and this includes the deoccupation of Crimea and Russia withdrawing its military from eastern Ukraine. This is only going to happen in the long run, and we got to prepare for a long standoff. Democracies are notoriously weak at this, but we have to get our act together on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. And I think you also underlined the message of Mr. Zieber that it's a marathon, it's a long-term endeavor, and it's not going to be solved anytime soon or in the next month, but it requires patience, and it requires planning and implementation as well. I'd like to quickly follow up with another question regarding the Black Sea region. Turkey was one of the countries that participated in the Crimea Platform Summit. So what do you think could be the geopolitical implications of participation of countries like Turkey and their potential influence in Ukraine and the Black Sea region? Thank you, Roland.
I give you two answers, Anna. One is that, of course, it's good to have as many countries and governments on board for the Crimean platform as possible. That's a good thing. I would, however, raise some caution or advise some caution in the case of Turkey. Why? First of all, I emphasized before how much the EU's relations with Russia should have democracy at its core. That's the one connecting element of all the parts of the Russia strategy that I see personally. And Turkey today is not a democracy. Now, that doesn't mean that one shouldn't cooperate with Turkey on such issues as Crimea, but one also has to see, and this is my second caveat here, that Turkey has its own issues with respecting territorial integrity of neighbors in the case of Cyprus and Greece in the Aegean Sea. And, you know, there have been some rather angry spats and some justified indignation and protests by the European Union to what Turkey has been doing there. You know, having said all this, I would still say it's a good thing to have as many countries as possible on board.
Thank you, Roland. And Deputy Minister, I'd like to come back to you with a similar question. about Russia first. So Russia, if I'm not mistaken, has been officially invited to Crimea Platform, but Russia has continuously labeled the Crimea Platform summit as anti-Russian, as Russophobic. So, and of course, the emphasis of Ukraine is to deal with Russia by diplomatic means and to achieve the final goal of deoccupation of the peninsula with, of course, diplomatic means and open dialogue. So indeed, the same question as similar to one that I asked Roland. Do you see realistically a dialogue with President Putin as necessary, or do you think, no matter what, Russia will keep labeling the initiative and every effort of Ukraine to return Crimea as, anti-Russian and something that is against Russia? Thank you, Deputy Minister.
I will try to respond the question in a straight way. I think that any dialogue is good as soon as it has a result or result-oriented attitude. I have a strong feeling, and I think that neither of our speakers has a doubt that Russia is probably not interested in having any dialogue about Crimea because their position is very blunt and very bold. They say that Crimea is Russia, full dot. No negotiation will be performed further. So when we started shaping the architecture of the Crimea Platform, we indeed publicly said that it would be possible to invite Russia as the party responsible for all of those consequences, the bunch of the consequences that we kept speaking about for almost 8 years. And of course, we believe that there should be a window in case if Russia decides to reconsider its attitude. But of course, there are few arguments to believe so. And as soon as we openly and frankly said that our aim and our ultimate goal is the occupation, which is normal, I think, for any country that was attacked by the neighboring country, that was disrespect of its sovereignty and territorial integrity, it's normal to clearly say what is our ultimate goal. I would not go into the discussion if it's a long-term endeavor or a short-term, but I know for sure that in case if we don't act today, we will never have the future that we want to see. Yes, it is very difficult to find a dialogue with a country that has discredited the dialogue as such, as a phenomenon, as an instrument. And I think that today Russia's isolation is not only about Ukrainian aggressive policy towards Ukraine, but also we can see how Russia acts in different spots of the universe. And I think that for us, and let me also stress once again, because we hear the official statements that somehow Crimea Platform is against Russia, it's not against Russia. It is for protection of international law and order. And really, as Roland said, it is really good to have as many partners as possible, including Turkey, especially with regards to the Black Sea region, because today we have domination of Russia and Turkey in the Black Sea region. And there is a special role that Turkish Republic, and namely the President Erdogan, played with regards to the release of some of the political prisoners, namely Ahtem Chigos and Ilmi Umerov, two Crimean Tatar leaders who were detained under the false, allegations. And by the means of conversation of two presidents, Putin and Erdogan, Ahtem Chigos and Ilmi Umerov were released. So of course, for my country, for us, it's crucial to use any instrument possible to save people if it's there. But as I constantly keep stressing that it's not possible to dance tango with an aggressor. I mean, it's a kind of interhuman relations. I mean, if someone behaves aggressively, first you try to talk, you try to find dialogue, but it doesn't work, and we see that it doesn't work with Russia. So this is again our message to our partners, that sometimes we have to be much more robust, much more decisive, much more solid. And of course, if we speak about political and diplomatic frame of our fight, our struggle, this has a very restricted instruments, and sanction is one of the most practical instrument, and we have to exploit this instrument, as Ronald rightly said, or I think it's Mikhail, that it's about preventive attitude. It's about not having the worst situation and prevent future aggressive ambitions of Russia, which I think are quite obvious for all of us. And with regards to even look today, there is the decision of Lukashenko and Putin. They have performed the single macroeconomy policy and then the defense and oil and gas markets. So I think that there is a quite a process that has been taking place. And for Ukraine, as far as we have 2,000 kilometers of border with Russia and a bit more than 1,000 kilometers with Belarus. So for us, it's a great danger right next to our Ukrainian Belarusian border. And of course, we will exploit any instrument to consider these dangers. And by the way, the Crimea Platform has not only the human rights dimension, but which is more important, I think it's about defense, it's about security, it's about the danger that comes out from the militarization of Crimea, and it is, and not only for Ukraine. I'm more than sure that it concerns much wider region than only the Black Sea region.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Actually, in your answer, you already answered your question that we had from an online viewer. Indeed, how Ukraine balances the relationship with Turkey while being occupied by Russia. But I think you explained that having more partners in dialogue and in this political and diplomatic exercise, we can call it, is the best thing. Mr. Siebert, I'd like to also ask you about what do you think, if, from your perspective, if there is room for dialogue indeed with Russia over Crimea in order to achieve conflict resolution and peace building. But I'd also like to ask you about security, because of course, since the annexation, Russia has been militarizing the peninsula, as we already said, by moving advanced weapons to the peninsula and military personnel. We all remember the incident in the Kerch Strait in 2018, the Kerch Bridge, which connects Crimea to mainland Russia, blocks the free passage of Ukrainian vessels from the Black Sea to the Sea of Azov, obviously creating a very unsecure and dangerous situation to Ukraine. But what is your assessment of the security implications for EU as well of this situation, Mr. Siebert?
Yeah, thank you for these questions. First of all, I can only support what both the other panelists have said about the relations with Russia and how to deal with Russia. I certainly also believe that it is to no avail at the moment to speak with Russia about giving back Crimea to Ukraine. It is a mission impossible indeed at the moment. We have to be firm, and the platform has plays a big role in that. We can only make our red lines clear and wait for better circumstances. If I may say so, again, as Roland and myself, being Germans, we remember the days when our country was partly occupied by the then Soviet Union, and it was in some ways a similar marathon that we had to go through, and it took a couple of decades, but it came out of a sudden in the end that the country could be reunited again. So we should be prepared, as has been said, and we should stick to our red lines. You could also think of, by the way, the Baltic states after having been annexed by the Soviet Union in 1940-41. It took even longer, but now they are independent countries again. So we shouldn't give up hope. We should have patience and determination and clear messaging towards Russia on Crimea. It was also rightly said, I think, by Roland, that it is particularly difficult, even in a potential, well, not potential, there will be a post-Putin time, yeah. It is even in a post-Putin era in Russia, it will be difficult because As I think we all know, the topic of Crimea for Russians is one where a broad majority of Russians think that it should somehow be part of Russia. And we have to make clear that it is not a question of feelings about where a part of a country should belong to, but it is a question of international law. And in that way, it is right to wait for a government in Russia one day that will acknowledge that international law has to be kept, and so Crimea has to be returned. This will not be easy, and it will probably not be quick, but we have to work for that. And the EU is committed to do that. By the way, sanctions in relation to Donbas are one thing. The sanctions relating to the situation in Crimea and keeping them always alive and adjusting them and from time to time putting new names on the list of those under restrictive measures is important to make sure that this is an ongoing process, and it's a topical question for us, and we will do so. Security. You asked about the EU's role. Of course, the EU is maybe not the first partner for Ukraine in terms of military security. There are others. There are member states of the European Union that are doing a lot, also with regard to the security in the Black Sea. A military presence from Western countries has been established and has been stepped up over the last years. The EU, of course, is also a partner in terms of security. If I may say so, the softer security, we are very much working with Ukraine on countering hybrid actions, disinformation campaigns, etc., that in today's security world are very important to look at, and we are strengthening together our capacities to be resilient against such attacks. We have seen that these have been hybrid actions in Crimea as well as in the Donbas, so it is very important also to look at these parts of the security architecture, and the EU is committed to continuously doing that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Siebert. We are coming to an end, but I still have two very interesting questions from our online viewers that I'm going to, first one I'll address to Roland, and the second one is specifically for the Deputy Minister. So I will kindly ask you to keep your answers very short. So Roland, the question about sanctions that you said, of course, are very effective, are determined. So a viewer is asking, how effective do you think Magnitsky type sanctions and accountability of human rights perpetrators and in international courts would be in raising costs for the Kremlin? Would these sort of sanctions be more efficient than the ones we already have in place?
Yeah, I think Magnitsky type sanctions, first of all, it's very good that the European Union has an instrument now to enact personal sanctions against people and sanctions against governments that commit human rights violations across the planet. This is not just referring to Russia. The fact that people who are part of murder, torture, of the consistent oppression of free speech and so on can be personally sanctioned. It's extremely important, and I think the very protests we hear from, for example, the Kremlin and its stooges in EU countries are proof that there is some effect here. But of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So the really important thing will not be, do we have this instrument, but are we going to use the instrument? And there it is, the jury is still out. I mean, we're at a very early stage.
Thank you, Roland, very much. And Deputy Minister, there is a question directly to you for Dmytro Shkurko from Ukrinform. And it says Russia has started Zapad 21 military exercises. Do you see any security challenge for Ukraine from the direction of Crimea and Russian militaries there? Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitro, for your question. But before I go to answering my question, let me just follow the line of the previous question and actually to speak a little bit of what Roland has already said. Are we going to use these instruments? Actually, what we think, and I take the opportunity of Michael Ziebert's presence here, we have, by the way, addressed the EU side to exploit the newly performed human rights global EU human rights global mechanism. That is a new instrument of reaction against human rights violations to exploit it in a Crimean case, because we believe that this is not of any doubt that it's a large scale and a tendency that is not and will not be stopped probably. So we think that EU can also consider the possibility of sanctioning the people whom we passed and the list of those who we believe when we have the criminal cases of our prosecution officers. So I think that this will be also a good message and a good instrument of non-recognition and attempt to help to people. Speaking about the Zapad 2021, it's joint military exercises of both Russia and Belarus. Any exercise that has been conducted close to the Ukrainian border is a potential danger, of course, and it's not only about the military exercise, so it's a permanent danger that we face. And I think that I partially answered the question in my previous messages. So I think that this is exactly what we are and should be aware of. And this is about what we are going to be coordinated, including with regards to the Crimea Platform frame. And also, let me repeat myself once again, saying that the Ukrainian army is not at the stage as it used to be in 2014. So it's much more capable today. And of course, we do put a lot of effort as a country, as a society. The budget is there in terms of building up the Ukrainian army, in terms of having capabilities of responding in case if this danger can be can have a physical shape.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. And Mr. Ziebert, if you have any reaction to the question on sanctions, we'll be happy to hear it about the use of the Magnitsky type of sanctions. Thank you.
Yes, this has been recently put up as a new framework for EU sanctions against human rights abuses. And we had first filling, as we call it, of this instrument with the names of some people. It's a worldwide instrument. So member states, and it's the member states who decide. It's not the European Union here in Brussels, but there has to be unanimity among member states to put names on this list, the people to be sanctioned. It has been filled with a view to cover many countries, several countries in the world, among them already very prominently figures Russia, but also China, North Korea, etc. And so far, the understanding of the member states has been that this instrument should be used for very, very grave human rights violations. To give you an example, people responsible for targeted mass killings with thousands of people. So at the moment, the use of this instrument is at that level. And fortunately, I must say, without taking anything away from the human rights abuses on Crimea, we are not at that stage in the peninsula. We are very happy about that. But I don't preclude any further usage of this instrument by the member states. We will have to see how this very young and fresh instrument will be further used.
Thank you, Mr. Siebert. I think that was an excellent end to our conversation. We went a bit over time, but we did start with 10 minutes late, so we are still on time. I'd like to thank once again our distinguished panel. I think the takeaways from this conversation is that Crimea Platform is a great instrument, is a very powerful one, and can definitely have really concrete results if put into practice, and if everyone really commits and supports Ukraine in its purposes. And the second topic of that we addressed was the violation of human rights that definitely has to be raised and has to be really gain relevance more and more on the international arena. And then, of course, that while the Russian government is not the most cooperative, dialogue is still better than no dialogue. So I'd like to thank once again the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Japarova, Mr. Michael Siebert, and Roland, of course, for being here with us. Thank you to the online viewers. Keep following the Martin Center activities on our social media, and see you next time. Thank you very much.